Thank you. Hi, guys. My name is Stefano. Let's see if I can give you a little bit of insight. So I, as was mentioned, I'm a partner at Unit 9. We won Production Company of the Year this year. Very proud of that. I also sit as a non-executive director in other companies, especially when it comes to creative and storytelling ones. Book on a Tree is one. I'm also lucky enough to be a guest lecturer in a number of universities. So today we're talking about branding and brand storytelling. Let's start with something a bit sad, and let's see if we can get a little bit happier by the end of the talk. This is a Baudrillard quote from the 80s, when he said that a world of instantaneous, perpetual communication is unthinkable, and in any case, intolerable. So I think that this is pretty close to what we have now as a daily situation. I look at all the crowd here. We're always in touch and communicating with other people, constantly attached to our devices. And we really think, or Baudrillard used to think that this was intolerable, and instead we live with it. But is this bleak actual prediction as bleak as Baudrillard thought? So I have a little bit of a question here, and is, who does uses AI on a daily basis? Yeah, plenty of hands up. Whether that's ChatGPT, Midjourney, any of that stuff. Okay, so I would say maybe half of the people here. So as you can see, there's plenty out there of AI tools. We already use it, even if it's a relatively new thing. Funnily enough, this is an AI image of a kid. I'm not sure if he has the right amount of fingers. And all the images that you have here are actually going to be AI generated. So the interesting thing about this is that if you think about the AI impact on the world of brand storytelling, it is that it allows to have exponential content at scale, whether that's written, audio, imagery, video. Funnily enough, a lot of our clients lately prefer the voiceover made in AI to actors and actresses, which I found very bizarre. Of course, the way less technical knowledge needed. So it is as if AI gave everyone superpowers. But what's the point in a world full of superheroes, as plenty of films and other sci-fi elements can show us, is that is very, very noisy. Everybody superpowers, everybody can create everything at any given time. It looks great, and there is definitely a lot to celebrate about it, but there is also definitely a lot to think about it in terms of what does it make when you're trying to stand out as a brand. What do you need in order to stand out in this noisy world where everybody has superpowers? How can we deal with it as brands? So I want to take a point of view on this that is not just inspirational one, but a little bit of a practical, using neurobiology and taking a look at the media landscape. So I always like to use as much research as possible. These are 3 great books to understand this. One is called The Shallows, which is a great study in neurobiology with digital. The other one that we're going to use it's called The Gutenberg Parentheses. And Reader Come Home, it's a really, really wonderful book about what's happening to our brain with different digital sets versus reading in a standard way. Now, I had this inkling for a while that actually this period of time that we define as modern is something that is going to go away, right? And then I found out that this exists as an actual theory that is called the Gutenberg parenthesis. And the idea is that before the printing press and now in the digital age, we have a way stronger return on an oral and visual culture, which, if you think about it, is pretty intuitive, but the fact that it exists as a theory really made me happy, because if you take a look, and this graph is completely imprecise in terms of the scale, but this is we've been around as humans 750,000 years, roughly, and we've done human stuff in these 750,000 years. Verbal stuff, visual stuff, tribal stuff, content that adapts very heavily to the context, according to how you guys react. I might change this talk, having that sort of interaction. And then we have this very short period of time, if you take a look at that, 1450 to 210, 500 years, where you have this print mindset that is very different from our standard mindset, discrete, deep thinking, the written word. And then we have this very big tech amplifier that is AI, right? And it means that the time of the print mindset is over, and that we're going to think about ourselves in very different ways. So I find it quite interesting that a lot of time I think that we still like, especially given our schools and when we come fresh out of school and think that we're this. We're very heroic, we're deep divers, we're focused on our objectives, and instead we're more like this, very superficial surfers. We go from one thing to the other. And we're really like this. There's a lot of gossip in our life, and gossip matters. And if you think about how social media works very quickly and moves around, we are basically ruled by the rules of gossip, in this gigantic village we live in. And all of this is amplified, by AI. So we are superficial servers in love with gossip with superpowers, That's what we look like at the moment. And if we think about this, what are the top features of this current media landscape? Shorter and shorter attention span. It's a miracle that you're here and you can listen to me for 15 minutes. I'm sure that I've lost many of you already. The fact that deep is gone, deep reading, deep thinking. And I think it's quite interesting about the fact that all these activities like deep reading and deep thinking are actually not natural, right? Speech is natural. But reading is not natural. We learn it. There's no way. It's not embedded in our gene. And that belonging matters. And it matters a lot more than being precise. It matters a lot more than being correct. The sensation of tribalism that we associate with teenage life, it's much, much more present in what we do. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the idea of an echo chamber on social media where belonging really, really matters. So this is a perfect actual sum up of this approach with a Gutenberg parenthesis done by Thomas Pettit. So thank you, Thomas, for this. And it's like we had this short, nice parenthesis that what is our institutions are based on nowadays, states, schools, anything. And then we have on the other side, and for what's interesting to us, this kind of shared, remixed, collaborative, and conversational type of culture. Now, I make no value judgment about that. I personally think that we have to sort of protect some of our achievements, but we have to deal as brands with the idea that we are on this side of the parenthesis. So what does it mean exactly for brand and brand storytelling? What's the implication for brands? Very simply, it's funny when people are like, oh, do I still need a logo? Do I still need to do all the classic branding things? And the answer is yes. You still need a tone of voice. You still need the right typography. You still need the color guidelines, all the basics, But the element of movement and enriching your brand in a way that has flexibility, your brand becomes a living being. And the fact that, for example, you need now motion and sound guidelines, and you need to be in constant dialogue with your audience. So let's do a little bit of a list of good news and bad news and how we can deal with it in this context when it comes to brand storytelling. So bad news, we're all dopamine junkies. We all want our little fix, whether that's checking our notifications. In the best of cases, worst of cases, we do that with substances, but we're there. Attention is like super short. There's nothing that we can do about it. But we can deal with it knowing that frequency of communication for brands has intensified, and how often we communicate matters so much more than what we say. I think that there are plenty of brands that are terrified of saying the wrong thing or not it being perfect. And in this case, in this world where, for example, the news cycle is so short, the regularity of communication matters so much. And then other bad news, written word matters less and less. I would like for a raise of hand, when is the last time that any of you can remember that have spent more than 45 minutes doing deep reading? That's like way less people, and we have some, I would like it to be, that I did it, but it's very difficult, right? It's very, in this context, you really have to willingly go with a book somewhere and not be distracted by other things. And especially if you're doing it on tools and devices that are designed to make you click on stuff, it's difficult to resist, that element. Now, the point about that, the corollary, is that, yes, written words matters less and less for humans, but the written word is essential when you think about the fact that you have to do things for SEO and ranking. So we still, as brands, need to do quite a lot with the written word. I find it quite funny that a lot of people that used to not be big talkers or big writers now, thanks to ChatGPT, are just like very, they write an insane amount of text. And you're like, but you used to be the guy that just did one-liner. What happened? ChatGPT happened. But the interesting thing about that is that with this idea of the fact that the written word is not there anymore, we need so many more touch points, than before to pass on a message. And especially if the message is very complex. And I think that, if you have a proposition like a startup tech proposition or any type of proposition, it is not just buy my product. This idea of having to do many more touch points is becoming such an important part of branding. Now, a little bit of good news is that brand storytelling isn't dead per se. It has, of course, changed quite a lot. And it has moved, as we were saying before, as part of the Gutenberg parenthesis, moving on to visual storytelling with a strong, strong, strong conversational element. What does that mean for brands is that you really have to think about your branding context. So other than social channels, what's the videos, what the images, and give it a way more flexible and articulated set of opportunities for audiovisual expression, Like what are the things and what are the ways in which this brand can exist in so many different contexts. And in this sense, 95% of brand guidelines nowadays are pretty crap, for this, even the ones that are the most consistent, because they're not reactive, they don't take into account the change that constantly happens. So in this sense, it used to be this. This used to be your ideal story. You have one piece of content, you start from beginning to end, you tell that story, and you have the attention of people. That's like the epitome of the perfect storytelling, dream of having your attention from the beginning to the end, like you're in a cinema, you watch something from the black screen until the ending titles. That doesn't exist anymore. What we have is a distributed storytelling approach where you're telling a story and saying a lot of different pieces of this story across different medium, across different social channels, and what you have is that you have a story that feels more like gossip for the way that it's structured rather than a classic narrative. And with this distributed storytelling, there are some elements that are an implication of that. One is that there's no guarantee that your audience will see all the story, right? Your audience will see some bits of the story, but not all your story. They won't see it in order, so they will get bits and pieces, and they will see it in different moments of the day. And in this sense, the brands that are doing well are the ones that understand that repetition is essential in what you're doing. Repetition is really key. And I see a lot of brands that are like, we said this message many times before, or they get bored of their own content without understanding that actually the fraction of the content that you produce that your audience ends up seeing is, if you're lucky, 20%, 30% of whatever you put out there. So that repetition element, you really have to go past your own boredom when you're thinking about this. And now, thinking about the good news is that, as you remember before, we said that it's very tribal, this new word, and it's like the old word, which means that now community building has to become part of your brand strategy. Community building is not something you do on the side, after you're done your branding, an afterthought, or something that you do as a separate part. Your brand lives through community building, and that's quite an essential part of what you do. And in this sense, featuring what I call your tribe in your brand narrative is very important. Creating a brand that doesn't have people in it, or the effect on people, or the fact that you don't know exactly who you're talking to, is going to be suicidal. And this is not easier said than done, because what your tribe is and figuring out who you are actually pushing your message through is not banal at all. And we're not talking about the abstract personas that are like a part of this. We're saying actual real audience, real users, real fan base. I don't know if you noticed recently how many big brands are basically lowering the quality significantly of the production to make it more similar to user-generated content. And some are doing it well, and that allows them to actually have a feature of their tribe into it. And that means also that in this context, representation matters more than ever, especially in big brands. It's important to understand who's going to use your product and embed those people. And by real people, I mean having real opinions, and those opinions cannot be as polished or as perfect as your brand messaging, and you cannot control them as much, which is, if you think about it, what's happening with influencers out there all the time. And there is an obsession with trying to control the message. The idea is that it's way better to actually being able to have your message repeated, if not perfectly, by people than having less of your message out there. And then the last part is like think a little bit about things like, for example, Discord, why it exploded in the Web3 craze, even if it's now phasing. Discord was nothing new, right? Discord was just another way for people to talk and connect. It was not a new technology, it was not particularly interesting or groundbreaking, or about what Twitch is for the gaming community. That's all tribal elements. And lastly, of course, the good news is that the production of great quality visual content has never been easier. All the images that you see in this deck, all the amazing things you've seen during the calls here, are all done with AI. You don't need a big team to produce great content. Now, what's the sad part about it is that I love this quote by Goethe that say that a rainbow that lasts 15 minutes, you don't look at it any longer, right? Something is not special when it's what suddenly is there for you all the time. So the corollary I found quite interesting is like anything that is difficult, anything that is not easy to achieve, becomes important for brands to be out there. So I don't know if you remember some years ago, when I started working in advertising, around 15, 16 years ago now, photography was everywhere because it was not easy to do great photographs. Now photography is very easy, very cheap to produce. Brands that want to make a splash don't use photography that much. Same thing, that image that I created took me 30 seconds of a prompt, very, very easy. Stylization and illustration, it is very deliberate, like the new Burberry logo, very, very difficult to make, or at least at the moment it's difficult to make it with the AI tools. So as a brand, the first corollary is like, find anything that is very complex and difficult to do, and that's your cutting edge of aesthetic. And that happens all the time. So that's why I think we will have a flood of easy CGI elements, and that's going to make stuff like intentional illustration and stylization that AI doesn't do really, really well yet, quite prominent. The second corollary is that every brand is a publisher, and they have to act as a publisher, and brands that don't understand that they're mainly publishers are gonna succumb and fail. So, standing out in that sense has become a matter of brand survival, and I also want to make a point about the fact that this is true for B2B and B2C regardless, because the reality of things is that even if you have the best B2B solution, if it's not the only solution, you still have to have ideas and act as a publisher. To that point, this actually means that you have to have a distinct point of view, and having a point of view of things as a brand is very, very difficult to have a point of view of many things. I have a great example by Seth Godin, where it was like, imagine an hotel made by Nike. Right? I think that you can probably figure out what an hotel made by Nike is. And then he points another element to say, now imagine what Hilton shoe looks like. Probably that's more difficult, right? You cannot apply the Hilton brand as well to another space. So it means that Nike does a great job at creating a brand that can apply in different places. You can do the same with Apple, for example. And instead, Hilton is not really a brand, it is a logo and a series of real estates. Now, that aspect of having a point of view and being distinct means that you have to have thought leadership, thinking about the way you speak, what's the color and what's cool for your tribe, what's happening in your industry, how the brand moves. It means having ready to think about so many elements and so quickly. But the point is that if you have a point of view, it will allow you, in this world of quick, fast gossip, to respond fast. If you don't know what your point of view on something is, then you cannot react and you cannot take the opportunity away. So if you take a look at some of the best brand activations that have been done recently, that was because the brand knew what they stood for. It was pretty precise. They knew what was happening, what they stood for, and therefore they could respond fast. If you have to figure out what your position is on something, then you already have lost the momentum and the opportunity. So you can also choose to not react, but I think that brands that choose silence have to have a reason to choose silence. And I think that's particularly true with all the misstep that you might see with political events that are happening nowadays. So brands cannot afford to just be not present in that sense, because everything is going back to that gossipy vibe. So just to conclude, there's good news and bad news with this. And creating a brand that smashes it is not really going to be easy, but I think it's important that you use your superpowers quite wisely and that you know that your brand survival is at stake, and by extension, your company survival is at stake. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful.